Picture this. Your kid walks into high school English, backpack still wet from the morning rain, and drip, a drop lands on the desk. But it's not rain, it's not a leaky roof, it's human waste straight from the ceiling tile. And while this might sound like a cross between a Stephen King short story and an SNL skit, I assure you it's neither. It's Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, October 2025. And while the pipes are literally crumbling, the school board is spending meeting after meeting deciding which library books are too dangerous for the students. Welcome to the place where the fetid waste of censorship meets actual fetid waste. It's a story that smells bad on every level. Hello and welcome to another supplemental installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your opinionated host. Now, if you've paid any attention to me or my various social media posts, you probably know or have deduced that I am not a fan of censorship, particularly when it comes in the form of banning books. And with that in mind, today we're going to stay local, at least local to me, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, because the story coming out of the Elizabethtown area school district is ludicrous on every level. So let's start with the building. Built during the Nixon administration, it has the same architectural vibe as every cinder block fortress you remember. Except now, the sanitary sewer line is 50 years past its warranty. Parents are showing up to school board meetings with photos, yes, actual photos, of brown water dripping through ceiling tiles onto students' desks. One mom told the school board, quote, "My daughter came home smelling like a porta potty at a music festival," end quote. Meanwhile, in the same building, the library is under siege. The board is debating Policy 109, a new rule that lets any parent challenge a book for, quote, "sexually explicit content," end quote. Translation, if it mentions puberty, gender identity, or, two boys holding hands, it's potentially on the chopping block. Certain board members have specifically discussed if classics with sexual or violent content, such as George Orwell's 1984 or J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, should be exempt or included. The same parents who can't get a plumber to fix the toilets are being asked to fill out forms so that their kid doesn't accidentally read a novel with a swear word in it. Priorities, folks. But let's rewind a little bit. In August of 2025, the first big leak. Sewage backs up into the cafeteria prep area. School starts anyway. September 9th, there's a board meeting. Architect Aaron Hoffman stands up and says, on record, quote, "The sanitary sewer line is failing. Fix it now or pay later," end quote. The board nods and approves. Quarterly air quality tests. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound and calling it surgery. September 23rd, presentation shows 3 renovation options. 100 million, 125 million, and 150 million. The board tables everything. Now, October 28th, 2 nights ago, as of this recording. The meeting runs 4 hours. They approve a new athletic field turf and a high school ELA curriculum. As for the sewage, crickets. Now let's talk about the books. Back in 2022, a parent challenged the book Me and Earl and the Dying Girl because the teenagers in it, well, talk like teenagers. The board tried to yank it. Students rallied. National news even picked it up. The book stayed. Barely. Fast forward to 2025. The board drafts Policy 109. Any book with, quote, visual or visually described sexual conduct can be removed. No appeal, no committee of educators, just one complaint, gone. At the March 28th meeting, a dad stood up and said, quote, my kid's drinking water smells like a sewer, but sure, let's argue about whether genderqueer belongs on the shelf, end quote. The board president reminded him that that was off topic. Off topic. The literal physical health of students was off topic. Now, April 3rd, 2025, a group of parents filed a lawsuit. They claim the board violated Pennsylvania's Sunshine Act, which by that means they held secret meetings to draft the book policy. A quote from that filing reads, quote, the board is more interested in banning ideas than fixing toilets, end quote. The district's response, we followed procedure. I'll translate that. It means we did it in the dark, but technically it was legal. Now, 2 nights ago, there was a live stream of the school board meeting, 4 hours long. Here's some highlights. 6:05 p.m., student recognitions. Great kids, zero mention of the smell in the hallways. 6:45, approve new turf for Jane Hoover Field, cost of which is $1.2 million. 7:30, first reading of Policy 004, public comment rules. They table it because even they can't agree on free speech. 8:15, public comment. Parent Alicia Runkle says, quote, my son's asthma flares up every time he's in the band room. The dehumidifiers sound like jet engines. When do we talk about that? End quote. The board went on to the next item. 9:50 p.m., resolution to end the state budget impasse passes unanimously because, Harrisburg is the priority. Now look, I get it. Books are scary. A novel might teach a kid empathy. A dripping ceiling, that's just character building. But the board's logic seems to work like this. Teenagers swearing in a novel equals moral emergency. Teenagers walking around in sewage, that translates to a quarterly air test. If this were a sitcom, the laugh track would have given up by season 2. I still have a kid in public school. Not in Elizabethtown, but, close enough that the wind could carry the same politics, though thankfully not yet. When I hear a school board spend 4 hours on turf and 0 on raw sewage in the school, I can't help but think, what in the world is going on? And please don't mistake these parents who were suing for some sort of radicals. They're band moms and soccer dads and people who just want their kids to read and not get E. coli. The board's defense, we're protecting innocence. Well, innocence doesn't pay plumber bills. And while we're okay with exposing these students to a rainbow selection of infections and respiratory ailments, protecting kids from reading about a trans character with the rainbow flag is the hill we plan to defend? Seriously, am I the only one who thinks that this is pure insanity? I suppose when you live in the anti-science fantasy land that many seem to these days, where a child can be turned gay, and where teachers spend their precious time in schools grooming students to change genders, well, then I suppose the novel The Perks of Being a Wallflower feels like a full assault on your children. You know, as opposed to the speculative danger of feces in a classroom. So anyway, November 25th is the next board meeting. The agenda is already posted. More policy tweaks. Zero information about the plumbing issues. Spring of 2026, there will be a bond referendum for renovations. If it fails, well, then I suppose the school will just literally collapse. But hyperbole aside, the sewage issue will still be a problem. Now, my prediction is eventually the pipes will win. Eventually. Because sewage doesn't care about your political bumper sticker. I suppose the worst case scenario is that students will begin having documented illnesses that will be attributed to the conditions in the school, and then there will be no choice but to capitulate. Far, far too late. Here's the thing. This isn't left versus right, like so many of the things I talk about on this podcast. This is competence versus culture war theater. This is taking on an issue that's easy, and by easy I mean cheap, because book bans cost no money. Instead of dealing with a problem that's difficult and that will cost money to remedy. In the end, it's all money, right? Especially when a tax raise could result in different names in the seats of school boards and other elected positions. The culture war is a distraction. The real fight is in the budget line items that nobody claps for. Moreover, this is a great example of why there needs to be involvement on a local level. If you're a progressive in a red county, follow agendas and show up to the boring meetings. Sit and listen to the monthly housekeeping, especially when it gives way to important issues that oftentimes get tabled. If you're in driving distance of Elizabethtown, mark November 25th. Go to the meeting, bring a sign, bring a kid's drawing of the ceiling dripping. Bring your disgruntled amazement at the skewed priorities. Bring whatever you have to bring to the meeting to help reinforce the idea that this entire argument is insane. And if you're anywhere else, check your own school district's agenda. Google school board meeting your town. Check the PDF. See what they're actually voting on. It's easy, especially in 2025, to be distracted and let's face it, exhausted by the national news. But there are important things going on locally. JFK Jr. can choose to swim in raw sewage if that's what he wants to do. But when we see priorities so out of whack that they ignore filth in a school, it's time to take notice. All right, and so ends my short rant for this supplemental installment of Back Porch Files. I'll be back on Tuesday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. And, in the meantime, as I always say, I would love to hear from anybody who's taking the time to listen to this podcast. You can reach out via any of the social media platforms that the podcast uses. The links to those are all on the podcast Linktree page, and the address for the Linktree page is in the podcast description. You can also reach out to the podcast via email. The email address is neighboroutleftpod podcast@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, whether you agree or disagree, or whatever it is that you have to say. So until next time, stay engaged, stay kind, and as always, have the week you'd wish for others.